Okay, so the video I was trying to make and the video that we're going to end up with are two different things today. I wanted to go over the effects tab in Flame a little bit. There's a bunch of videos on it, but wanted to kind of highlight some of the things that I like and don't like about it based upon an experience I just had. So I came into this originally thinking I was going to praise it and love it and say, hey, don't use Resolve or Baselight because you can really get what you need out of Flame's effects environment and its grading capabilities. While I think that's true to a degree, I can pretty safely say that I still think it's a very clunky experience compared to how Resolve maybe walks you through a start to finish on making grades and applying grades and kind of interactively working through shots and exploring some of the color options that they have. Do I think we can get there in Flame? Absolutely. As you know, that's kind of my bread and butter, and that's kind of where the lane that I stick in. So I really wanted to use the effects tab recently to do a true grading job that way without having to pull shots into batch and treat them like comps. And I wanted to move back and forth through the timeline and really try to use all the things that the effects tab has to offer. And so while I think I did get a lot of mileage out of it, there were a few gotchas along the way and a few things that just drove me nuts compared to my limited experience with Resolve and what I've seen from colorist in Baselight. So let me just do a quick walkthrough of the things that I'm noticing, and happy to kind of dive in deeper to any area that maybe people are interested in. So let's just get started. So this is just a simple timeline. These aren't the shots that I actually graded. This is just shots I pulled off of Pexels so I don't get in trouble. And let me just walk you through my environment. I like the 3-up view for grading. There's lots of different options, but let me just start off by saying I hate the manager. So even the fact that I'm using the manager is a huge win for Autodesk because I don't really like it. However, in the effects tab, I think it maybe makes a lot of sense because otherwise, especially if I'm trying to kind of mimic a Resolve workflow, the Flame certainly has what looks like a very familiar Resolve kind of thing happening with our film strip down here, which, by the way, if you need to turn on and off, is Alt F1. I found that really hard to find initially, but it can easily go away. We also have the storyboard view, which does many of these same things, which we may or may not get into later. But back to the manager. I don't like the manager, but the alternative would be to use the schematic. And if you want that to be kind of like your Resolve view, I guess that could do it. But I think as it starts to get cluttered with nodes, it makes it a little hard to navigate. So the 8 key is what the manager is. It's got a lot of functionality, so I am praising it in this regard. I can turn on and off layers very easily. I can name them really quickly from here, and I do think it's helpful. The other thing is our scopes. I like the 3-up view that gives me the RGB parade, the vector scope so I can check the saturation and do my white balance and whatnot, and then just an overall kind of levels. What's nice is if I need to zoom in and out, let me just say I'm on a Windows keyboard but working on a Mac, so the commands I'm giving you are more for what happens on Linux, but it's control and spacebar can zoom in and out of these windows, and then I can pan them just with the spacebar. So that might help for when you're trying to get really granular with what you're doing. So working up just a shot when I'm in here. The other thing that I just want to point out is I'm in a Rec 709 environment. This is a Rec 709 clip. I've set the controls to lift, gamma, gain, which is the most familiar for most people anyway. Lift being the shadows, gamma being the midtones, and gain being the highlights. So we're on a video type. If I was in ACES or log, I would switch to those controls to give me more options for what those color spaces present. So That's where you change that, is in the control image type. You can also set your preferences in Flame so that whatever color space you're working on, it defaults to that image type for your grading. Anyway, so first thing I will do, and this is something I've learned over the years, but I was probably stubborn about, is you don't try to do too many corrections in one node. It's just not how you want to build up a grade. So you want to kind of be very step oriented. So the first step usually will just be kind of a levels. So we're going to go ahead and use our primary grade just to kind of do a quick levels adjustment. Let's just say we're going to take the lift, the shadows down a little bit, and maybe pull up the gain a little bit. Okay, so nothing major, just kind of trying to set like an initial balance. So F4 is the result view, F1 is our kind of front view or source view. So we've done levels, great, we're gonna move on. The first selective is already built in, and I recommend naming everything you do. So let's just say this is going to be some contrast. Great. Now we could do the contrast through our tone and actually use the S contrast, or we could use some curves and actually start to add some points and make like an S curve. So I'm going to delete that one. I hit A to add the points, D to delete the points, and let's just exaggerate this. So now we have contrast. Let's say we really like this contrast and we're going to apply it to other shots. Obviously we could copy the entire grade. Here, let's just go over that real quickly. If I hit the meta key and escape, we get kind of our, effects tab. This is from previous ones that I did, so let's just delete those. If I want to save this contrast, I can right click on the contrast and say save to Explorer, top level. It's already named contrast because I had named it, and now that is our selective one that I could apply to these other shots. If I want to save this entire grade, I could drag this into the bin and just call this, shot 1, and now that's the look that I can apply. So if I just want to apply the actual contrast, let's say, to this second shot, I can, let's see, can drag on here. It's saying that we have a selective one already. Do I want to replace it? Yes, I would like to replace it. So now this contrast has been applied to our second shot. If I want to, on this third shot, just take the overall grade that we did on the first shot, I can just drop that on. And what's nice is, yes, because I named everything, we now have the same stack in the same order. So if I recognize that, I had done something to work on her yellow shirt, that might not apply when I copy the grade over, but it will be easily identified because I named it. So I'm gonna close this now. So that's just the meta key and escape. And we are back to our first shot. Let's go ahead and keep working on this. And this will be kind of the first gotcha that I recognized when I was doing the grade in Flame versus what I've experienced in Resolve. So I'm gonna move to a new selective. Let's knock her out a little bit. So we'll just we have a lot of different ways. We could key her, we could use the tracer and try to separate the foreground from the background. But we do have some machine learning and some abilities to kind of knock her out with little effort. So here's the human body. I'm gonna hit active. If I hit F9, you'll see immediately that I'm seeing the result view of her matte, and now I'm seeing this purple overlay that shows what's been highlighted. I can see there's some issues. If I hit F9 again, I can kind of dial the threshold if I need to try to add, and this won't be perfect. I'm not trying to get this perfect. I just want to show you the tools that I have available. I can also start to shrink here. We can dilate and we can blur. So that's about all we can do. If I'm not getting the results I need, we could refine it a little bit if we need to. I've gone through, we have these controls. There's probably some other things I can do. But in grading, we try to spend as little time doing roto or really fine tuning these things, because the hope is, I think, that it's pretty generous once it's actually in playback, and by doing some softness and finding that right balance from the foreground and background, you can get away with a lot of actions here. But what I want to really show you here is, like, this is what I don't like, is that I have this view that gives me this nice overlay, but I can't really judge it very well. And in Resolve, when you qualify something or pick a color, it immediately can show you a pre-multiplied view over no background, which I think is really helpful. So in Flame, the way to get this is by going into Setup and Display, and now we can also dial the color. So I can say I want to set gray, but this doesn't do what I need because we need to invert it. So we're going to do Overlay Outside, and now I have this awesome kind of pre-multiplied view that I can use to check my key and whatever I'm doing or whatever I've tried to highlight. So I could see, like, we certainly have issues now, which are something that I would start to be able to play with and control, given, you know, the time that I have. So if I'm really just trying to get this, you know, whatever, and I could deal with this, I could garbage her out, I could do other things. But let's just say that's pretty good for what we're trying to do. I'm going to go back to the F4 view, and now with our master grade selected, I'm just going to affect her body for the most part and try to pull down some levels. This is probably where I'll also get a little bit more fine-tuned, and, you know, the primary, if I do the gain and think I'm pulling down our highlights, it's going to be a pretty big move. You can see the scopes are making some pretty big adjustments. I would just want to fine tune it because I really just want to knock the highlights down a little bit. So in the tone option, I do have shadow mid-tone highlights, which are just going to be a little bit more finite in their dialing. So now I can just roll off the highlight a little bit, maybe pull down the mids a little bit, and if I feel like I've crushed it too much, maybe just lift the shadows a little bit to get a little bit more detail. So now if I want to just check that result, I can hit the H key, and I'm hiding it, turning it on and off, but I'd say that's pretty good for what we're trying to do. And again, if I just want to see her matted out, I can hit F9 and cycle through to see the alpha and see her pre-multiplied over a background. So now I'm going back to the F4 view. Let's do a new selective, which will be number 3. We'll name that clothing. And now we'll do something very similar, but this time we'll use the keyer, and we're just going to pick the color yellow. So let's see. You can see in the diamond keyer, it's going to map out where we've selected. If I hold down Control and space, I can zoom in and out, and I can hit the space bar to pan. So that's super helpful. And now if I want to check this, we're just going to go to F9 view again, and I can see we have just a few issues. So what do I need to do? I need to, like, remove that from the key. We're just going to do softness and minus, and then I hit sample, and now I can try to eliminate as much of the competing colors that aren't working with what I'm trying to focus on. If I went too far, I could, let's see, start to sample some softness back in. We could also do the tolerance again, if I know that that's part of the area that I want to include, and hopefully not get too much of her skin tones involved. So if I'm feeling pretty good about that, I can now check it, and I can play it back, see that, you know, there's a few holes that I need to patch up, but it's, you know, let's say that's pretty good. What we can do here again, we have those same tools, so I can soften a little bit by blurring it. We could shrink it in a little bit, and we can dilate it if I want to try to fill in some of that area. So let's say we're pretty happy with this. Let's just do a little bit of an adjustment on her clothing. We'll just use the curves. I'm just going to pull it down, take some of the hotness off. We can also, let's see, go into the tone here as well, and let's say somebody really wanted it to be overly saturated. We'll just pump a little bit more color into it. So that is where we started, F1. Here's our new view. Oh, and let's just change the background a little bit. So we'll do one more selective, and we'll just call this BG. Now, in this particular case, because there's such a change in value between the foreground and the background, I think I could probably just do a key on the background. So let's hit F9. I'm gonna add some tolerance here. I don't like that I have to hit sample every time. I don't know if there's a way to switch to sample without hitting the sample button. If there is a way, that'd be great to know, because I find it kind of annoying that I have to hit the sample button every time, just as an FYI. We want to remove some of this interior, so I'm going to switch to the minus softness, and we're going to remove some of this out, and then I just want to add a little bit up here. Maybe we'll do a little tolerance, and that should be good enough for today. Obviously, I can play with these controls as well, just like I'm in the color warper, and I can move around gesturally in the keyer itself. I can also move the sliders with values. So again, there's a lot of different ways. I think it's pretty familiar if you've used the color warper. And now we're just checking what we have. That seems like a pretty good background. I'm gonna go back to F4 and see our result. And now we're just gonna grade this up. So if we're going to say we want to change the hue ever so slightly, I'm gonna plot. It's gonna set a point, and now we can kind of roll within that value a little bit and kind of start to shift. I can see that we have a little bit, of blotchiness happening. So in this particular case, maybe I do need to add a little bit more tolerance, or it could just be that, as this is a very heavily compressed image, maybe it was there all along and I'm just really pushing it too far and exaggerating it. So let me just come up a little bit. I can zoom in on the curves window with the control and spacebar, and we'll just roll off that a little bit. So still have quite a correction, but not as extreme. And also what's nice is, unlike batch, I can play and loop this and make the corrections as I'm going in fairly real time. So if I want to, let's see, start to play with the, let's say the midtones of it, I can do this while we're looping. And so I get a real feel for how the shot's gonna look as we're moving through. The last two things I want to show you, which are really important, are how we would sample colors. In Flame, I can hit Alt and Spacebar at any time, and I can get the eyedropper kind of up here, and it's great because I can map what I'm seeing on the vector scope and really get a sense of, skin tone and whatnot. So this is our skin tone line. I'm checking our skin tone. It's right on the line, so great. I'm pretty happy about that. If I need to keep the eyedropper up all the time, it is Alt, Space, and C, and now I can map that color with the color sampler and just leave it parked somewhere. So if I'm really trying to adjust something, it might be helpful just to kind of always have it in your view. And then Alt Space C to get rid of that. If I want to do it through the menu, it's just hitting the eyedropper key. So those are pretty helpful to have. Pull-in references and split screens and all that are also very helpful. We're not going to get into that today because we're running pretty long on time, and this is obviously a very big node. The last thing I do want to show you, though, is if you do nothing else and you're going to just use Flame to maybe set a little white balance, but you don't really know what you're doing, or have very little experience with the scopes or with the effects tab in general, let's just go ahead and, here, let me just start over. Let's just go back and put back the manager. Oops. Oh, we need to go to source. 8 for the manager. We're in our result view. We're gonna start fresh. Here, you know, the levels are pretty, it's got a lot of shadow and darkness anyway. Let's just go ahead and do a little bit of gain and lift the levels up a little bit. Obviously we are heavily in blue, so let's go ahead and we want to balance this image out. There are a few ways we can do this, even if you kind of don't know what you're doing, but let's just, you know, I don't even really need to look at this image very much at all. We can, if you really wanted to do it almost all through the scopes, you really could. This is where having the color sampler is helpful though. So let's just pull up, where'd it go? You know, we're gonna set the white balance. So we're gonna assume this shirt is in fact white. Now, the thing that Resolve does that I do find helpful and kind of limiting in Flame is if you're on the vector scope, you can have it segment to highlights, midtones, and shadows. Here in Flame, I can't do that as far as I know. So I just kind of have to hover to where I think a shadow is, to where a highlight is, and to where some kind of midtone is. And then from there, that's kind of what I use to nudge into the proper color balance that I'm looking for. So we're gonna do our color balance, in our first selective. So we have white balance, and all I really am trying to do is trying to get everything closer to the center, because right now we're heavily blue. I want to try to even it out. So we're going to take what we're considering our gain in this case, which is almost our brightest point, and we are going to just take the color wheel and we're going to start to nudge everything towards the center, because as we get towards the center, this will be our white point. So now I'm zooming in, and you can see that for the most part, we have started to even out the highlights. So now with the shadows, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to move the sampler. I can tell that I'm definitely in the darkest parts of the image, and what is still heavily being not an even tone. You can see it's still heavy on the blue. So we're going to go into lift, and we're going to do the same thing. You might not be able to see it, but here is where we've sampled the color, and we're still just going to nudge that closer towards our white point. So now we have our highlights and our shadows are closer to white or neutral. And then let's see if we can find a midtone that would work. You know, the midtone might actually be, that might work. Let's just see what we get. So now we're gonna have our gamma, and we're just also gonna slide this over. And now I can see that I've probably gone too far, especially with that correction. So I'm gonna roll off of that, because really I want this to kind of be even throughout this window. So you don't want it to be too heavy on any particular channel. So let's see. Okay, but now I'm gonna kind of like double check everything. So I'm gonna go back to the gain. I'm gonna hit this white collar again, because I can see that we've probably gone a little too far now that we've corrected other channels. So we're just gonna slide that back to the middle point. I'm gonna check that wall again. You can see that we've, again, probably need to move back a little bit. And then, yeah, maybe we'll just use this as, oh, we'll use this as our midtone. And then something like that. Now, the face would be a separate thing. It's clearly got a cast on it that's purple, but I'm not too concerned with that for the purpose of what we're trying to do here today. I mean, clearly it's in a room that's got a like blue projector happening, but that would be like the start of like a correction just to get the white balance, because now we've removed quite a bit of that blue. You know, if I'm looking at these scopes, it was heavily blue. Now we've evened it out quite a bit. We've shifted everything, and that's all done just by looking at the scopes. I did not dial any of it based upon looking at the image itself. I could have done it almost all just doing this way. So I think the takeaway here is you're really trying to, you know, even out the RGB. You're trying to swing the vector scope to be everything more towards the middle. If you're trying to kind of get a neutral white balance for your highlights, your shadows, and your midtones. And generally that will kind of be a starting point, because then from here you can start to push your looks, and you can start to, you know, if somebody wants to warm it up or whatever they want to do, that starts to happen after that process once you've kind of balanced it out. I don't know. I think generally walking through this, I think it's a great tool. I think it's still needs refinement. I think it needs a little bit of polish. I think in Resolve, it's just a little bit easier to move from tool to tool. Here, you know, if I need to start to get other things outside the master grade, it does get a little bit complicated at times for what I'm trying to do. I do think it's a little bit easier to experiment in Resolve with how they've set up some of the tools, and even the way that they're how you can navigate through the curves, or how you can just pull a color and start to dial it really quickly without really having to think too much. Here I just kind of have to work around to different parts of the module, which I think can be a little bit tricky. Shift F1 is the storyboard view, so I said I wouldn't really get to it, but I do think it is helpful to just be aware of. And then if I control and spacebar, I can navigate through there. If I want to go back to the manager, I just hit 8, and then in here I'll just because we're here, if I want to bring up the reference, I can hit Control and B, and that does that. And if I want to actually take a screenshot of this image, I can hit Control and G, and now that has been stored. And now in any shot that I want to see that in, I can hit Control B, and it'll bring it up. It shows me its waveform, which is really helpful. I can choose what kind of display I want. So, you know, side by side might be very helpful if I'm trying to grade. And then I can just turn it on and off with Control B again. I can pull up the references using the meta key and escape, and I can store them. So that's my stored reference, and that's very helpful. So I can have a nice library of stills. And yeah, it's pretty great. The more I've walked through the shot, the more I think like, yeah, it's not bad, but again, I just don't think it's for everyone all the time. If I was going to become a full-time colorist, I would probably not stay in Flame, but for the few times that I have to jump in and out and work on multiple shots, especially if they're from a similar role, then it's very helpful. And I think you should spend as much time in it as you feel like it's worth your time. So thanks everyone. Talk to you soon, and reach out if you have any questions. Appreciate it.